Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Nice to see familiar and new faces. All right, I think everyone should be connected now. So welcome. I'm Rebecca, and I'm the communications wizard here at Round Sky Solutions. Thanks for joining us for our introductory webinar on embracing uncertainty through cooperative facilitation. So I know many of us are zoomed out and on Zoom often these days with the changes, but I just want to touch on some logistics about this webinar before we get started. So if you have any questions or to answer our questions, please type them in the chat box you'll find in the toolbar. And likely that's on the top of your screen now, a speaking bubble image. If Daniel or Jamie, my co-hosts, will say hello in that so it pops up, that'd be great. And you can feel free to interact with each other and introduce yourselves to all attendees or send a private message to me, and that will, I can help you clarify any tech issues. And we will take clarifying questions as needed throughout the session, and we'll leave time at the end as well for questions. So the next thing is that this session is going to be recorded. It is currently being recorded, so we can send this out to you after and everyone else who registered as well. And in general, we'll be keeping everyone on mute so that we can focus on the speakers, and when prompted to use your microphone, you can use that as well, of course. And we only have a short time together, just 1 hour, but if you leave with questions, that's okay. You can always email us and we will have future opportunities to discuss. So that's the logistics. So with that, I want to name that in this call we have leaders who have registered from all over the US and spread across the globe as well. And we're all connected here today on this shared topic of dealing with uncertainty. We have this global connection on experiencing uncertainty over the last almost year now, well, really 7 months. And some of you work at cooperatives, some people work at nonprofits, conscious businesses, collectives, and some of you are from the reinventing organizations or teal world. And it's really great to have such a diverse crowd here in terms of space and work and experience to dive into this topic. It will really give us a more full understanding. So you're in the right place if you're craving a space to connect on embracing uncertainty with cooperation. You're in the right Zoom room. And we really believe that cooperation can better resource us to be able to respond to uncertainty as opposed to an individual deciding all the answers. So in this call, we're offering a space to discuss what's coming up for you and some concrete tools and tactics. And we'll be pulling from what we know best and teach in our remote cooperative leadership certification program. We'll give you some introductory lessons on those, ways to embrace uncertainty, and then we'll wrap up with questions. So many of you know us, but I wanted to share just 3 things for you to remember. So one is that we're a remotely owned worker co-op, meaning we're a business where the workers own it together, and we work with all types of leaders, aspiring leaders, and organizations that value and want to improve their democratic or participatory processes. The second one is that we create free offerings like this session to support people in their personal and professional development. We've hosted a bunch of free webinars and challenges like the ones that are showing up here on the screen. So those are all available on our website if you're curious about them, and more to come. The third thing is that we have put a lot of work into our main strategic initiative, the Cooperative Leadership Certification Program. And we worked hard to get at what today's leaders really need to succeed with all the uncertainty and complexity. And this includes the tools, the skills, the nuance, and we love being a part of this community of intentional, thoughtful leaders. And these are some of the folks, and some of those people are here with us today, which is great. And applications are being accepted now through Tuesday, September 15th. We'll tell you more about that. All right, so now I want to give us some space to get to know who's on the call. So please use the chat box if you're willing to tell us 3 things about yourself, your name and location, what you're hoping to get out of this call, maybe a couple words, and Given that remote work adds a layer of complexity on embracing uncertainty, please share your most used or the most hilarious to you conference call bingo moment, as you can see here on the screen. So I'll give you a chance to do that, a few seconds to read over these great bingo moments, which we may have a bingo today at some point. You're welcome to put it in the chat box if we make it. And while you do that, I will introduce myself in a few seconds. I'll let you first read this. So I'll read out some of the options. Some are, hi, who just joined? Can you email that to everyone? Sound of someone typing, possibly with a hammer. Can you hear me? Next slide, please. I'm skipping some. Can everyone go on mute? No, it's still loading. Those are some of them. And the slides will be shared if you're really amused by this and want to laugh. Sorry about the quality there. All right, so I'll keep going. So I'm Rebecca. Like I said, I currently live and have been in New Orleans for about 7 years. I'm originally from California, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation today because I've been working remotely for just about 4 years, and what I've learned a lot about myself and collaboration, and I've learned a lot about myself and collaboration at Round Sky. And I'm sure you can relate that when collaboration is not working, it can be really uncomfortable and overwhelming to figure out how to move forward. And then uncertainty pops up, and then it's even more unclear about how we move forward together. So I think having alignment is super important and challenging in this uncertainty and also remote work world. All right. And my favorite bingo moment is sound of someone typing, possibly with a hammer. All right, and I'll pass it to Daniel to introduce himself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca. My name is Daniel Little, he, him pronouns, and I'm based in Northern Vermont here in the United States. I'm a co-founder of Round Sky, a master integral coach, and one of the instructors here at Round Sky. Yeah, I'd say my passion is to help people learn and grow and actually like heal in a sense with somatic approaches to mindfulness and capacity building. On a personal level, I love to dance and spend time in nature. And so I love to bring that perspective of our bodies and kind of our natural condition, as you know, so whatever that is, to my work in the world with groups and with facilitating and you know, being here with you all. I'm really feeling this uncertainty topic a lot lately. It's and glad to be here to talk about that with you and how we can all be more resilient in times of big change. Yeah, we're all, many of us anyway, many people are being really called to or demanded to make changes in our lives and organizations, and ultimately let's use that to the advantage of making a more healthy, just, and resilient world for all of us. And so I'm hoping that uncertainty can lead to opportunity as much as possible. And that's me. And Jamie, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Jamie Kearney, and Daniel and I actually have a strange amount in common in that we're both integral master coaches. We're both really into somatics, and that's also part of how I connected with this work. I'm a recent instructor with Round Sky, but I've been training with them for about 7 years, and I got into this because I consider myself a change agent. What I want to focus with on people is like, how do we become immune to change? What's that process where we keep staying in the same pattern even when it's hurting us? And was looking to find more effective ways of helping people become more resilient and adaptive. And I was really excited by this idea of combining that with group process, which is really, I think, a big part of what this work is about. In my own world, I do a lot of Vajrayana Buddhist meditation, and I'm really interested in the connection between kind of sacred ritual and being more effective in the sort of mundane aspects of our life. And this uncertainty thing is big, and it just makes me think about the gap, right? It's like the moments where routines collapse or familiarity, our familiar structures fall away, because I think there's this huge opportunity for massive changes or to get really stuck and really struggle. And so it's this kind of peril and opportunity time. And I think this work is really important for that. And yeah, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. That's true. Routines and what we kind of look to as sometimes stability can really be shaken up. So I would love to hear from other folks, and I want to get a collective picture. So I'm going to pull up a whiteboard so we can get that and kind of see how you all are relating to uncertainty. So I'm going to share the whiteboard here. And Daniel's going to share what it looks like from your point of how to.
Yeah. So on your screen, if you're looking at Rebecca's screen share, there's a little tab up at the top called View Options. Now, at least on most, it might not work on Chromebooks or something. I'm not sure, but anyway, View Options. If you click that, and it's a little menu. There's an item for annotate. Then you can annotate on the whiteboard. It brings up a little toolbar that allows you to have a text button and a draw button. So for instance, if I hit the text button and I click on the whiteboard, I can start typing. And then when I hit enter, no, not when I hit enter. When I leave the text box, click somewhere else, then it shows up. Ah, there it is. Okay, great. So yeah, and you can draw with the draw feature as well to make shapes or something like that. So play with that. And what was the prompt again, Rebecca?
The prompt is, how do you relate to uncertainty? So I added one here, scary, and I'll add another one here, excited. So feel free to add how you relate to uncertainty. And if for some reason this isn't working, you can't add something, put it in the chat box and I'll bring it over for you. Anxiety, a bridge between. Ooh, that's great. That's deep. So much research to do, decisions to make. Absolutely. Like a swirl. Yep. Fun, opportunity. How do you access it again? That is, if you're having trouble, you scroll your mouse up, I believe. Go to settings.
View options.
View
or
options.
It might be view options and then annotate. And then it pops up a toolbar with a text bar and a draw bar. Yeah. And again, I'm not 100% sure it works on all platforms, but so you might just be having that problem as well.
So put it in the chat box if you want to include it here. Meditation. Try not to attach to expectations and results. Yeah, have to be flexible with that. There's anxiety, but also possibility, weighing pros and cons. And if you're feeling like there aren't words for you, but you're really resonating, you can go to your toolbar and go to the stamp with the check mark, and you can check mark someone else's thing or heart or star it. So I might do that here on this squiggle. That really speaks to me. Go inward, becoming antagonistic against my own needs. Breathe. Absolutely. Lots of hearts around the squiggle and meditates. Going inward and not attaching to expectations. Great. So it's complicated. It's not just one thing. We have another one here, space to get creative. I'll add it. Yeah, uncertainty does add this kind of like spaciousness sometimes to get creative and have to create something new, like new structures, new ways of being together. Absolutely. Great, thanks for sharing. So I will close that. And pass it over to Daniel.
Cool. Great. And you're doing your screen again. Okay, great. Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. So now that we've connected a little bit and arrived, let's dive into some concrete tips for. Sorry, I'm losing my place, my own train of thought here. Let's dive into some let's dive into some tips for how to embrace uncertainty. We're here to like give some ideas, some of the key things that we've come up with. You know, there's this word of pivot is popular right now because so many of us are experiencing the need to have to make a massive change of directions, you know, and perhaps quickly, or and looking at all the different ways that people are responding to uncertainty, it's very complex. And today we're going to approach this in two ways, similarly to how we approach the cooperative leadership certification program. We'll focus one on the kind of personal and self-development piece of how do we each as an individual, a facilitator, a leader, kind of manage and bring forward ourselves to this uncertain moment. And two, on the tools and structures that can be a resource and hold us and give us, you know, patterns to rely on in these, you know, that are kind of like larger patterns that we can navigate the uncertainty within, in a sense. So on this call, we'll start with the power of somatics and getting grounded and aligned. And then we'll dive into a specific tool for facilitating meetings that are highly relevant to the current needs of the moment as defined by your actual team. And then we'll dive into some tactics for reprioritizing and connecting on the concrete work. What shifts do we actually need to make during this time? So starting with somatics, I want to actually start with another kind of like grounding and arrival thing. So just for a couple moments, I want to invite us all to check in with our own bodies. Let's just not completely learn this in the head. Let's come into our own being for a moment to ground ourselves in whatever way. I like that word grounding, you know, because for me, that's the vibe in a sense that I need to feel resourced and have capacity in these moments of uncertainty. But it might be something else for you. You know, you might like to tune into something that really brings you joy, or some memory of a loved one, or of a special place, or something good that happened recently. So really do with this exercise what settles and enlivens, you know, your own body, your own being. And I'll offer some suggestions. You know, so for myself, it's just yeah, and you're welcome to close your eyes or not, as you wish. Sometimes it's easier to do that settling with the eyes closed, but it's really, again, very finding your own way, what's working for you. And but just for that groundedness for myself, I sense into like, what's holding me up? You know, I'm feeling the weight of my feet on the floor, feeling the chair under me and against my back. And just noticing that as I do that, my breathing just got a little deeper, just kind of spontaneously, but you can also do that purposefully, just extending the breath just a little longer. Just kind of dropping into what's alive for you. And it's easy sometimes for the uncomfortable things, the discomforts to like jump to the surface and when we start paying attention to our experience, but see if you can really notice like what feels good in your body, or what feels supportive, or how do you feel supported? And breathe into that. Just breathe along with that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And we can come back to the room even now, and just, but just as you come back, just let your eyes be soft and look around the room and just kind of like, where are you? Where am I? Here I am in this space. I'm in my room here, but I'm also on the screen with you, and like looking back at the screen and seeing some of your smiling faces and some names of people that are on the call. This opportunity to feel like, oh, there's other people here that are curious as well as I'm curious. Well, who are these people? So bringing your attention back to your room, to each other, to yourself. Just what do you notice as you sense yourself here with all of us? Now, for me, it's a certain sense of softness in my heart, and a little gratitude for all of you showing up. And that's really relieving in a sense. That's really a good thing. So yeah, if you'd like, you could take just a few seconds to reflect on what you notice, looking around the room. If you have more than one page of people on the screen, you might just kind of scroll through and see like, oh, who else is here? Yeah. Okay. That's good. Welcome, everyone. Jamie, maybe I could pass it off to you to take us a little further into our somatic experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Daniel, for doing that. And that's a great example because it's only really possible, I think, to approach somatics experientially, right? Because that's a lot of what it is. It's not just physicality in a sort of external sense. It's our internal living experience of being embodied. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the resources that getting into your body, which is our first tip, can bring you. Because the first one is that it's actually a source of wisdom and creativity, I think. It's become almost cliche at this point, but our bodies often know things that our conceptual minds don't. And so it's something that we can tap into in choosing how to respond to an uncertain situation. We can rely more on our senses, our direct experience, or our gut feeling about what to do next, rather than exclusively going with whatever ideas we might have about what's going on. And that's especially helpful when we don't really know, we're out of ideas, right? The other thing, which is something that I experienced just in doing this exercise with Daniel, is that it's a tool for rapid centering. And a lot of the time when we talk about our center, even abstractly, you know, we're not thinking up here, right? It's sort of more in our core. And so that's, again, a place where we can bring all of ourselves to a situation, which can allow us to be more impactful and connect with people more effectively. What's kind of most important to me is that somatic work can also help us integrate charged experiences. A lot of the emotions or feelings that are overwhelming or are things that we just don't know what to do with, maybe we were taught that we shouldn't feel certain things, those tend to hang out in the body and they tend to accumulate. And when we don't have the tools to kind of digest or metabolize those experiences, it makes it more likely that when we're uncertain about things or when we're overwhelmed, we can get hijacked. And so having this as a tool to regularly work with these big experiences in a resourceful way can be super helpful to our ability to work effectively with others and facilitate collaborative leadership. And there's lots of reasons why we include that in our training. But I think the essence is really, again, supporting you in meeting all of yourself so you can meet all of the people around you. And that's it. Okay, so in a pandemic, right, or just all of the kinds of upheaval we're experiencing, it can be really easy to panic or shut down. And this is what we were talking about. These overwhelming experiences disconnect us from our creativity and resourcefulness. And we can't overcome that shutdown with force of will, right? Just wanting to deal with it isn't enough. We actually have to have tools to show up to our immediate experience and be able to connect with others in that. So again, we can process it, process the overwhelm, and then we can start to dig into, okay, what do I most deeply want to do here, even if it's scary or overwhelming? So Rebecca, back to you.
Great, thanks, Jamie. That's really helpful to kind of have like the experience and then also to the why. Well, why do we do that and how do we connect it to ourselves as a leader? And that I want to just sum this up, kind of like TLDR, too long didn't read version of this, is just the tool or the tip for yourself is to start a regular practice of checking in with your body. And utilize this in your teams when you're feeling stuck, when maybe you're going around and around. Invite your team, like, let's just take 10 seconds to ground in, or if there's something hot, we can feel it in our body and we can use that, that feeling to know how to respond to a moment. And it can be helpful to have an accountability practice set up for yourself and to reflect on how this shows up in your leadership and to do that with a community. So our course provides that, but also just want to invite you to find your community, whether that's our course or another space. So that's the summary for that. And I'll pass it to Daniel to take us to what's next.
Okay, cool. Rebecca, I'm not sure the slides aren't showing. I'm not sure if you want them to be.
I'll share them.
Okay, cool, thanks. So one of the things about one of the next tip is to, using tension-driven meetings, we're calling it. And this tip is, it's about like, how do we use this, data in a sense from our bodily experience to bring forward to bring forward what's true, alive, real in the moment. So we built some of these connecting somatic moments into our meeting practices. And one of the things we found, is that meetings are this like really key place, right? Like places when we're gathering together to make decisions. They can be so great when things are like really popping and really coming together and really like, we're in a flow with each other. And they can be so horrible where we're just in disagreement and conflict and dysfunction and lack of alignment. And so how do we make our meetings really relevant and responsive, to our actual changing needs? And so this is where we're tying it back to somatics. We've designed this optimal flow for meeting practices, which you can see on the screen here. It's too much detail to go into right now, but just gives a sense like, oh, there's all these different steps of a practice to do together of holding a meeting. And we wanted to focus just on one part of this flow right now, which is about agenda building and how to build an agenda, process the specific things that need to happen, and move forward. So in cooperative leadership, in the cooperative leadership certification program, however, we do go into all these sections and get a chance to practice and facilitate this whole process as a facilitator and as a note taker, scribe, we call them. So if facilitation is on your list of things you want to improve, then talk to us more about that. So, but what I want to share today is this tactic called tension-driven meetings, right? So it's a practice we learned from a tool set called Holacracy, which we have some similarities to. Has anyone heard of this idea of a tension-driven agenda? You could type that into into the chat box and tell us like where you heard about this idea. But I want to share a little bit about the bigger picture before we dive in. There's this principle in ecology and permaculture: waste equals food. And it's this idea that in ecology, basically there's no waste. Like all the byproducts of metabolism from one organism are, food in a sense for another part of the ecosystem. And that there's this healthy symbiosis in a sense throughout, throughout the ecosystem that allows for what looks like waste to one organism to be food for another in a sense. And we want to apply this to our organizational situations. We can think about human social ecosystems, and we can see that we're very good at noticing, like being critical, having critical mind, noticing what's missing, what's broken, what's wrong. Like we're so, like even neuroscience, like pain is registered so much more quickly than pleasure, things like this. Like how do we use that, like to our advantage? But it's often discouraged in organizational settings, like complaining or negativity. It's seen as not helpful. Oftentimes, if it isn't seen as helpful, then it's kind of swept under the rugs, or in a sense pushed aside. But if we do that, it tends to accumulate and build up and gum up the whole system. And this keeps us from being able to make use of that information that's being sensed. People are sensing something. Right, it's back to the somatics in a sense, like there's a bodily experience of like something's going on here. I need to like speak about it, and if there's no place for that to go, it just kind of creates not a good feeling, should we say, within the organization. So instead of letting this material go to waste, in our courses and with our clients, we're using this ability to notice what's needed by making really explicit room for what we call our tensions. In other words, we're interested in our ability to notice what's going on, what's the new opportunity, what could be improved, and what's in the way of doing a really great job. These tensions, if they're properly composted through the meeting process, produce food in a sense. They produce improvements for the organization. What once was complaining now has a place in the process to be listened to and processed in a more effective and efficient organization. And particularly helpful in times of crisis and uncertainty like we're in now, This is a completely new situation. We have to really depend on the people in our team and in ourselves to sense these tensions, what's needed, what are the needs of this team, this organization, in order to be able to navigate through an uncertain landscape. And when I say tensions, it doesn't have to be negative, right? I just want to clarify that. It's like a drawstring on a bow, or it's like a gap between here and there. So we're just like sensing like what's missing. What's missing between where we are and where would be a good place to be to move towards. Okay, so we use these I'm sorry, I'm a little lost in my slides here. We use the power of tensions because, one, utilizing our collaboratively designed meeting practice along with tensions means that you can show up to any meeting ready to facilitate and knowing that together you'll do a good job and that it'll be relevant, especially in uncertain times, where we need each other's perspective and sensing in order to figure out how to move forward. And it's a powerful human-centered practice that efficiently invites all the team members to bring forward whatever's on their mind and with respect to the team, from celebrations of work well done to things that aren't working or priorities that need revisiting given whatever uncertainty has popped up. And it also builds and really kind of demands engagement as everyone gets on the same page. This is not a conference call that people can simply stay on mute and kind of be checked out. Okay. So, Jeremy, did you have a couple of things you were going to add here?
Yeah, and speaking of which, my favorite bingo moment is being on mute, and just needed to make sure that didn't happen. So I really like the archery metaphor. It makes a lot of sense to me, and I really do see tensions as trapped creative action in an organization or in individuals. So when we're sensing a tension, we're sensing the drawstring of the bow being pulled back. And the arrow is really someone's creative intention, their contribution to the group. And so as a facilitator, or training as a facilitator, our job is to support people in surfacing or bringing up these tensions and then guiding the team members through activity that process them, which helps the arrow find its target, right? And that pulled back, that tension can open into this satisfying feeling of impact. This is a huge place where as facilitators, we can leverage somatics because, we all know that cliche again of you could feel the tension in the room, right? This is something visceral that we can pick up on. And so we're relying both on our minds to see what's going on in our agenda, but also on our bodies to feel what needs to move in the group. This can include something you're excited about, a new idea for a product or service, or it could be responding to a crisis. Suddenly I have to move all of my work online. It's been in person this whole time. What do I do? So all of these are things that we generate from the team, we source from the team, and we put onto a living agenda is what we call it. And we'll share the template with you. Everyone can see and edit this document. And this is where we place our tensions as agenda items. And once a team has some practice with this, they can add agenda items beforehand. And so it doesn't take as much time. And each tension is introduced in 10 seconds or less by the person who's kind of holding that tension. And it has a single tension holder, which is usually the person who brings up the item or tension. And then when the agenda is built, and everyone kind of gives input to that, it's the facilitator really keeps this process moving by sensing and choosing which items are effective to address in which order, and then really being able to both kind of rationally and intuitively get a sense of what process is going to open this tension up or move it forward.
Great. Thanks to both of you for kind of setting us up for that. The understanding of tension-driven meetings, it's definitely can shift a lot for a team immediately. If you just use this idea, it can really pinpoint and makes things much more clear. So I want to share some examples about what are some potential examples that could come up in your team to kind of bring this home a bit more. So the first example is a team member has a personal emergency and we need to figure out how to distribute their work and prioritize together, right? This person can't work as much, so we need a new plan. So someone might put on the agenda how to divvy up the work with one less person. That's attention. And with the initials, RFM, those are my initials. And then another example is a team member might mention that they know our finances have been hard over the pandemic and they want to revisit finances in general, and also how to figure out how to pay ourselves. Like what are we going to do? Are we going to cut our pay, or what's the solution to this? So Daniel might bring up this tension as finances check-in and then introduce it. And then another example might be, okay, there's this really important political moment with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I want us to figure out how do we respond as a team. And that tension might look like engaging in the Black Lives Matter movement. And then whatever answer, then the team would figure out how do we do that? What do we do? So those are 3 examples of tensions that could come up in your team among many, many more. It's kind of infinite amount. And so what do we do with those? How do we process those tensions? That's a big question, and we're not going to get into that today. But in the leadership program that we've been mentioning, we teach our students what to listen for and how to facilitate tensions to both be centered on what the individual needs in order to make some progress on resolving that tension or moving it forward, is how we like to say it. As well as how to do that quickly, and knowing that we have many tensions that are coming up. And like I said, you won't learn the ins and outs of that, but I do want to just share this document, which you'll have the slides, so you can look at this later and take a chance. But we like to think of what are going to be the outputs of these tensions? What's success going to look like for us today on this moment, even if it's not fully complete. So in the purple here are the outputs that will change, and the process will change for how to get that output depending on what the tension is. So what that person is sensing is needed some movement on. So don't get too deep into this. Just wanted to mostly let you know that this exists. And we're gonna go right into the next tip now. And so I'm gonna pass it to Jamie to summarize this one and then take us on.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. So yeah, overall, if you can reframe your meetings with tensions to respond to uncertainty by getting at the heart of the matter and source your agenda from your team to align on the work together, that taps into the needs of those on your team, and it starts to build engagement. And again, I know this is a lot of information, but this is an embodied practice, right? So over time, these technical details start to become more familiar and intuitive. So our third tip, were we going to go into hot tips now, or are we going to go to tip 3, Rebecca?
Let's go ahead and do the sub tips to this tip.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a few things that can be really helpful is that to remember that tensions can really be anything, right? And to give people permission to start to access those things. The second tip is when the facilitator chooses our item to process, it helps a lot if the participant is ready to introduce it and ready to identify what kind of output would help move the tension forward. And our third is we can support our team by being willing to share any ideas that would move another person's tension forward or item forward. So it's not like, oh, that's theirs, that's their problem. We're really engaging with it. And the fourth is being attentive to the needs of the whole team in addition to any needs we have for ourselves and our roles. So starting to orient to the group. And so our final tip is getting alignment, resetting our priorities. And I really talk about this in terms of, evolving or adapting to changing situations. When our life conditions change, we can recognize this and adapt, or we can ignore it, right, and work to resist the change, or sometimes we just collapse, right? And we don't always have choice about this, but it's like whenever we have choice, it can be really, really helpful to start to see, how can I adapt? How can I use this new situation, which comes back to this principle of waste equals food. This tip calls on us to make use of the gap that happens when business as usual grinds to a halt. And I like to use the metaphor of a trapeze, right? We're holding onto this bar, which is our world as we've known it. And in order to cross over to the next situation, we have to like step into the void, but we can't grasp onto the bar that we're on. And we also can't just let go. We have to let go while really looking at what's ahead. And that's what the shifting of priorities is. And as a lot of our clients are seeing, when we're pushed to shift our priorities, a focus on strategy really becomes essential. And having a clear and simple method to do this as a team is really important. And that's what we're teaching in our leadership program.
Nice. So I'm going to offer you just a quick process for shifting your priorities, which we think of as a strategy conversation. It's not going to be a big, long process that you would do with strategic planning, but it is something that will be helpful for you when you have to pivot or shift or adapt to what's needed. So I'm just going to go through these steps. And again, you'll have these slides. So I'm going to go a little quickly, but you can always come back to them. So the first one is to put this new strategy needed tension on the agenda. When this agenda item is selected, have the tension holder or the person who brought it up introduce it, and then the next step is to jump into brainstorming, which this probably feels familiar to you. So we have some guiding questions that we have found are really helpful to get that going, like what's really worked well in the past and what do we need in this moment, which can be a big shift from what often is asked, like how do we make money in this moment? That's just about profit, but this is like, what do we need as people in this moment can shift things? And what does our community need? What initiatives help us leverage our strengths and really tap into that? And these other ones here. And we have a scribing or a note-taking tip is to have someone who's fast and really excited to note take, to jot down everyone's ideas, and you can even crowdsource those notes together. Or on stickies, there are lots of virtual platforms that we could suggest. So that's step one, brainstorming. And then you want to jump into theming. You'll invite your team to identify what are the themes that are coming up in these responses, and the note taker or the scribe will record these themes as they're identified. Maybe you'll move things around to see what's under each theme, and this can be helpful to start to see what are we collectively seeing as our future. And the goal is to identify about 3 to 5 initiatives out of that. And then the next step is to identify some metrics with your team, answer the question, what's measurable that would tell us that we're moving in the right way forward, that we're moving in the direction we want to go. And that it doesn't have to be super beautiful. It just needs to be clear enough for now, and you can always revisit it. So just some metrics. And then lastly, my favorite part of this is a strategic metaphor. And this really adds the humanizing and beautiful piece of pulling all the parts of your new quick strategy together. And to do this, you'll invite your team members to share several words or phrases that capture this emerging strategic metaphor. And maybe people have already mentioned it throughout the process. So some include planting the seeds. Maybe you're planting the seeds for the growth of your organization, or tending to the body. Maybe you need to nurture yourselves. Building the house is another one. Ready for takeoff. These are all really good metaphors, and you should pick one for you. And then that is the basic building blocks of a new strategy. And the metaphor is really cool because it will guide your group, and you can all have this shared language. And the final steps of this is to reflect before you decide this is our strategy. Reflect on what's missing, a somatic moment, right? And then you consolidate. Is this clear? Make sure the verbiage is clear enough, the metrics, the strategic metaphor, And then you take your process through a collective decision-making method so that you can see if there's going to be any harm caused by trying this out, this strategy. And we have a process that we call integrative consent, and we teach that in our course. We also have a toolkit on our website that's free, so you can use that tool for that. And I will pass it to Daniel to kind of just bring some of this home.
Yeah, so just a couple thoughts. One is the note that some of the particular features of this process are the metrics, the metaphor, and giving people the opportunity to reflect. Metrics make sure we're not just being pie in the sky and hold ourselves accountable. The metaphor is this psychological tool that can convey a host of information quickly and be a good reminder of where we're headed. And this reflection slows down the process enough to let important ideas emerge. Switching key which that's really key in these moments when we're making a quick change, is to have you can have quick change, but with slowness kind of at the center as well.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. This brings up to mind another important piece, because strategy is so important team-wide, and that's why we use the process integrative consent that Rebecca mentioned, so that everyone's involved in shaping it and deciding on it. But it also is kind of a high-level process in terms of pointing us in a direction. And I find one of the things that can be almost tragic is when you have a phenomenal high-level process, but then the lower-level details of the operations and dealing with projects are not managed well, or they're not connected to that high-level process. And then it's like these brilliant ideas that organize and center the team don't go anywhere. And so in tandem with strategy, it can be very, very important to have not only effective processes for project and task management, but also shared accountability, so that the team is working together to help hold each other accountable and to self-manage, and that all of that process work is consistently connecting to these high-level priorities. So we're all working together as a team to not just get stuff done, but go, hey, are we prioritizing the right things? Is it connected to this metaphor in our initiatives? And, to just summarize this tool, or this tip, when things are stressful in your team and they're changing, again, it's so easy for the chaos to be amplified. And the more people you have, the more it can get amplified. And likewise, though, every person you have on your team can be a creative resource if you have the right process. So rely on these processes and turn to your teams, because you can do much more impactful things together when you're all aligned.
Thanks, Jamie. I really like how you put that. So I want to just summarize everything here so you have some takeaways. And this is a big picture view. So we designed our course to teach leaders and support their integration of key remote collaboration tools that can help them and their organizations be responsive and agile in the face of crisis, whether that's internal or external things happening, or if it's a really small thing or a really big deal. So we have these crises that happen, these uncertainties that happen that are not always large scale, but do make a big impact. So the next step for yourself is to consider how you might bring these aspects into your leadership to increase your ability to facilitate responsiveness in your team and yourself. And one might say they're kind of inseparable in this collaborative moment, right? So to list out the tips you will see on the screen, the first one is to commit to that somatic process, or just try it out. Try it out for the next month. Like, what happens when you take 10, 30 seconds every morning or at some moment of the day, and see what happens. Reframe your meetings with tensions to get at the heart of what's going on, and source your agendas from what's really present and relevant. And you'll see some tools listed here that I've mentioned today, and that I can share out, and that we also go into in depth in our cooperative leadership program. And revisit your strategy, even if it's just quick and it's not perfect, it's not beautiful. It's important just to get clear on what's actually a priority in this moment, in the midst of big changes and work. So alignment is really key. So now integrated integrating these tools to their fullest often takes time. So if you do try out the tensions, give yourself time to try it out over and over, and then over a number of meetings, revisit, okay, is this working for us? Because the first one will feel a little different. And so we've designed our course to meet over a period of time, because we know that change sometimes takes time to sink in, and like really adapting these things to our work. So we have this 10-week course that's full of interaction and really tangible projects to build up on in your work. And it's in a cohort so that you can learn from others throughout the way. So here are some of the tools that we focus on, and that living agenda and standard meeting practice, integrative consent, operations tracking, like Jamie was talking, having the strategy but not connecting it to the work you're doing is such a common mistake, and it's really key. So the operations tracking can really help you connect that. And mapping out power, map out leadership of what's happening in your team and how you want it to happen. And then an understanding and shifting of power can also be really important. When uncertainty happens, power dynamics can show up. So that's another thing that we practice in our course. So I want to take the last 9 or so minutes to see if there are some questions here about what we've offered today or anything else. So please put them in the chat box, and we'll see where that gets us. And I also, the other piece, which we don't usually do, this is the newer thing we're doing, is if you have any tips that you wanted to add yourself of your experience of uncertainty, please add that in the chat box, and I can share those out after the call as well. So I'll let you have a minute to kind of surface your tensions or questions that are coming up. And we did get one. There's this question of, this process seems to suggest not having draft agendas set up in advance. So tensions instead of a draft agenda. Is this your suggestion? Can you share why? And maybe Daniel or Jamie can share a bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the organization, like what's really needed. Like sometimes in government, you have to have an agenda posted ahead of time. You'd have to give notice and things like this. So that can be, sometimes there's no way around it. But we find that actually when we're in a meeting to move our work forward, the most relevant information is what's available right now. And that setting it up even a day in advance, things shift, things change. They're not, fully on point at that point, so to speak, right? And so if we want the most relevant, the most on-time information about what's needed, then we want to surface it right then and there. I mean, people can certainly add things to the agenda, and ahead of time, within Ronska, we're often putting things on ahead of time and, maybe seeing what's there before the meeting and kind of thinking about what we want to bring forward and things like that.
Great.
Great, and I guess I can say something quick about that too, because 2 things come to mind. One is just this idea that we come back to over and over again in this work of minimally sufficient, that we want to get things that are in a state where we can move them forward. And so, that's what's so good about having a living agenda, is we can compile something beforehand, and then we can kind of keep adapting it and responding to it in the moment. The other thing is that one of the things I really love about Collab is it's a set of tools where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but it's not like super prescriptive, like you go through the training and you get those tools and now you have to use them all together. So if you're in an organization where having a set meeting structure is really essential for you, you can still learn this way of doing it and apply aspects of it while keeping the structure that works well for your organization. And you can keep changing that over time too.
That's a really good point. And we have like a whole section of that in the course of how to bring bits and pieces, because teams are often really afraid of change and don't want to learn how to do things the way that they've always done it. And so it can be really challenging. So we expect that in some teams and support our leaders in that way. There's another question that has come up, and feel free to add them to the chat box, folks, that if you have questions. This one is, when I think about applying this model to my semi-collective workplace, so not fully flat, I fear that one person would take up most of the space with their particular tensions and concerns. What are your suggestions for handling that and creating more balance? Would either of you like to speak to that?
Go for it, Jamie.
Yeah. It helps to just use lots of sarcasm. I think that I'm kidding. I think, there's a lot that's built into the structure of collab to both acknowledge when someone's taking up a lot of space and start to shift that power. And there are a lot of different ways to take up space. And one of the most basic things is that having everyone on a team who's trained to facilitate is really, really valuable, because the facilitator actually keeps things moving along and is attending both to an individual's tension and to the needs of the group. So it can be this really dynamic process where you have someone, the person who's holding attention can really just focus on their tension. Like, I have this issue, I want to see it resolved, because they know that the facilitator is managing the process of the meeting. And so there's someone there who's going to be making sure, like, oh yeah, this one person has talked about their stuff a lot, so let's attend to it, but let's attend to it and also keep things flowing. And by having everyone on the team trained as a facilitator so people can shift roles, that helps to overcome a bias that an individual facilitator can have and prevent any one person from having too much power in managing that process.
Anything you want to add, Daniel?
Yeah, some things that we haven't really talked about so much is like some of the process tools about that we're teaching in the course. There is like doing things in rounds and things like that, where we're giving people a particular time slot to weigh in and gain input, but it's not it's not just free form. So there's times when free form is fine, but that allows for a lot of individual differences in personality and stuff like that to come out as a kind of we talk about that as an implicit power, like somebody who has a strong personality or just has a lot of questions or whatever, like can sway things, perhaps unnecessarily, because, so if we have a more evenly distributed attention in the meeting, for instance, like, around to hear from everyone is a little tool for balancing things out when that's needed.
Nice. And I would just add that maybe this isn't a bad thing. Like, maybe there is someone who does sense more tensions or has that space, and they would be sensing it even if there weren't a tension-driven process. And like, the space allows them to bring that up. So I would just ask that person to reframe, like, you're afraid that this might happen, but it may end up being really generative. Like, the waste equals fuel or food is really possible. So, and how it shows up. We have 2 more minutes. We have one more question here that I will pose here. This I think being on tensions relies on a level of comfort with all team members being able to speak up about the tension they may be feeling, i.e. Psychological safety on the team. Do you have any suggestions for ensuring this is the case?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in. One thing is what we've already spoken to that Daniel mentioned, like having rounds, having, the meeting structure set up in such a way that people who might ordinarily take up a lot of space, or other people who might be more hesitant, there's more of a natural balance built in. But I think there's also something that we haven't touched on so much here, that in our training, we put a big emphasis on personal development work, that sometimes someone could have great value to add, but it's actually hard for them to share. And there are processes to actually support someone in learning to be more vocal or more engaged. So it's not like, oh, just do it. It's like, what do you need to practice to develop those capacities so there is more ease in stepping into that? Because it can be really vulnerable and hard to lean into that without the support to move in that direction over time.
And And on the other hand, like there's sometimes there are very good reasons to not trust speaking up because of the organizational dynamics might not be so healthy yet, right? So then having a, having a certain consistency, like say, okay, we're going to try a new process for like including everyone, and we're going to stick with it for 6 months because we don't want to, we need consistency to build trust, and so we're going to keep at this for a while, and then we can hopefully build that trust over time, right? So that makes it so there's not like a certain sense like, oh, something bad is going to happen to me if I do speak up. Like, hope, like how can we work on that so that it's not the case over time?
That's a really good point. And this can't just change like that, right? You're not comfortable and then you're comfortable all of a sudden. It is process and practicing over time and shifting those dynamics to really create a space where people can bring up their tensions, the hard ones and the more simple ones that may at least be more readily available to process. All right, well, we're at time. Thank you everybody for joining us. And if you have other questions, here are our emails, which you're welcome to email us and connect. And I hope that we can continue the conversation in the future about how this can show up in your team. And I wish you some smoothness with your uncertainty.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take good care. This is so wonderful to connect with you all, and that's how this work really comes to life, is when people start applying it. So best wishes with all the uncertainty that's abound, and hopefully you can apply some of these tools. Take good care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.